of you who don't know Mike that well, Mike's one of our best judges, one of our best debaters. Gone through a lot of competitions over the years, judged a lot of finals over the years. He's being ashamed for me calling him good, but it's actually true. Just if he says anything else, it's fake news. Mike's a good debater and a good judge. He's gonna give a workshop to you about how to come up with arguments, because even good debaters sometimes really don't know what to do with something, and Mike can find you the perfect solution for everything. At least not that I know that perfection doesn't exist, I guess, but he can at least give you a way to come up with better arguments, come up with some cases which suit a lot of debates, and make you therefore better at debating and not getting your partner during prep time because you're stressed. So I love to give the floor to Mike.
Yay!
It's your boy.
Yay, it's live. Wait, just checking if the thingy
Mike,
is working.
Did you break at Euros?
Yes.
And Oxford? Twice.
Yes. Okay.
Were you CA at the BDT last year?
Yes.
Are you ready to?
Yeah. Okay. Are we ready to?
Are you
Okay.
secretly in love with Joshua?
Yes. No. Secretly. Secretly.
It's not a secret anymore.
What? Okay. Cheers.
Okay, so just some maybe so just some points of semi-order before this workshop. This workshop is going to be more lengthy than others, but also more interactive, and to make sure that we kind of talk about every single point in the extent that everyone can understand it. Make sure that you, if you want to say something, raise your hand. Try to not go on for hours and hours and just, I don't know, let me sort of have a good time, stuff like that. So maybe fun fact, the first time that I had this workshop myself, it was called content generation, and I was very naive, and I was like, is this about us being too focused on content, like this generation of debaters? And then I was like, 3 months after the workshop happened, I was like, oh, that's what the workshop was about. So I decided to relabel it to the generating arguments. I think at least for some people that might clear it up. Let's take this thing here. So what are we going to do? We're going to look at what intuitive points. What do you do with those, right? Usually you have some kind of idea about what kind of arguments you want to bring. We're looking at something called trade-offs, clashes, and changes. You probably have heard of that. A little bit about stakeholder analysis, more to the extent that you guys have heard of in beginner workshops or during the open house. How can you do that more effectively? The bulk of the workshop are going to be concepts. Those are largely just stuff you can use, right? Think of a concept, for example, equality or rights or politics or economics, stuff like that. How can you use those in more debate? And then a little bit of our real-life examples. Some stuff before that. This is a subjective and non-exhaustive list. Of course, if you come up with an argument that is not treated in this workshop or a style of argument, that's completely fine. If you can explain to the judges why that argument is important, that's good. This is just probably going to be in case that you can't think of any arguments or something like that, or that you think that you need some new arguments, you just want a lot. In case you're, for example, in the closing government. So for those who does not know how British parliamentary works, because there are some new faces. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to very quickly sketch that. So that's going to last 30 seconds. Okay, so in a debate, you have 4 teams. This is the first team that's in favor of the motion, the second team that's in favor, the third team that's against, and the second team that's against. And if you're in this team or this team, you have to bring something new compared to that one. So it might be intuitive that you think of more arguments because they might have brought a lot of them already, right? So that's something about that. For this workshop, I also approach other good debaters who are way better than I am. For example, the best speaker in Europe right now gives the second tip, which is just watch a lot of online debates. You can also just put them in the background as some sort of podcast. And for some reason, some of the knowledge will always kind of stick. You hear that some arguments are made more often. So just do that. What you can just do is Google or in YouTube put British parliamentary debate or EUDC or WUDC, stuff like that. It'll all be fine. There's also links on the Facebook group, I think. Otherwise, I'll let Victor put them in there. Go Victor. Okay. Lastly, use prep time effectively right before a debate to get 15 minutes to prepare the motion and to think of your arguments. And how do you then do that effectively, right? Because I know that when I started, I was just like, hey, let's just shout everything that I think, and then the 15 minutes are up, and then we start the debate, and then we have no idea what we're saying. So 2 points. Firstly, read the full Oh no, wait, I've been doing shit. So read the full motion. Um, that there are various things. So firstly, actor emotions. Usually you have a motion that is this house would do something or this house believes something. But sometimes you also have motions that are phrased this house as, I don't know, Dirk would do something. That means that it's not, you're not looking at what is good for society as a whole, but for Dirk personally. Maybe Dirk, it's in this incentive of Dirk to start a civil war in Tilburg University. I don't know. Maybe there are some reasons. Maybe there are some reasons for Dick to actually kill Wilson. That is why he is the actual murderer at the murder party. I don't know. Going to the extremes here, but you kind of get the gist. I know that I'm just going to call Joshua by name. Joshua was in the finals for English as a second language in London, and there was a motion that was this house as the feminist group or something like that would do something. And their case was just we think it would be good if the feminist movement would do something, but they never laid the link to why the feminist movement cares about that, right? That means that you're kind of irrelevant to the debate if the other people do explain that link, because you don't explain why that specific actor would do it. For example, also, one example under this house, as Otto Frank would choose not to publish Anne Frank's diary. Maybe it's good for society, but maybe Otto Frank has some sort of emotional values and stuff like that, and those supersede the benefit for society, for example. Some sort of examples about that. By the way, so this workshop is also streamed, which means that you'll be able to see that on a YouTube page, and the slides are going to be on the Facebook group as well, so you don't need to copy everything. Just make sure you listen really well. Secondly, never and always in the motions. I personally think those are bad motions, but they happen. Sometimes you have emotions such as this house believes that regions should always be able to call a referendum for independence. That means that it is legitimate for opposition to just prove one example in which it is not a good idea, for example. So that is especially for opposition very good. If you read the specific words, then you can very easily win. In that case, I would not recommend you to just run one example, maybe run like 2 different examples, stuff like that. Okay? And then fourthly, fourthly, the and thing. There's a very specific kind of motion that I had as an example, and I'm not sure what other examples are, but you're probably going to see them, which is, this house believes that feminists should publicly and personally judge men when they do not cause an orgasm for their female sex partner. Which is, you need to, as government, prove why you will do it publicly and personally, because it's legitimate for opposition to say, we will only do it personally, right? So just read the motions and make sure that in your speeches you also say that you prove both sides. So that's just some general tips on prep time. And then lastly, very quickly, like 20 seconds, underlying issues. If you know your current affairs, there are likely motions that are inspired on current affairs. For example, this house would ban criminal pardons. Trump did it a while ago, but there was also a case in Peru in which an ex-president was pardoned from his crimes, even though he still had like 12 years to go or something like that. It's not not crucial, but it's nice to like get real life examples and stuff like that. I have no idea what the fuck is going on in my phone. Cool. Okay. On the introduction questions. Cool. Now we're just going to make it quite interactive, mostly in the concept. So just on intuition.
Was civil versus criminal court?
Oh right. Oh no, I took that out. I think, or did I just skip it? So who here does not know the difference between civil court and criminal court? Awesome. We'll skip that. So if everyone knows the difference, that's fine, because I gave this workshop in Rotterdam as well, and some people didn't know it. But good noticing. Not missuspected. Cool. Okay. Then intuitive points. Of course, you always get some sort of idea like this could be a reason why we should do the motion or why we should not enforce the motion. Write down everything, even if you think it's a stupid idea. Maybe it sparked some sort of ideas later on, or maybe your partner gets some ideas from that, some stuff. In the end, you just have a list of, for example, 30 arguments, and you can always cross some out, right? But the problem is if you don't write them down, maybe you forget them, right? And then your opening team does take all of your points, and you don't know what to say. So just do that. Trade-offs, clashes, and changes. This is something that some people like to do. I think this is especially an example where you want to try if it works. Try and see if it works for you. That is, you are always sacrificing something to get what you want. Otherwise, proposition would always win, right? If the motion would always be a good idea, and you would never give up anything, there is no opposition to the motion, and the motion should not be set. So just assume that your opponents are good, assume that they will prove what you are going to lose, and the thing is what you then need to do is, that's an example, that's not what I wanted to, I thought there was something else. What you want to do is weigh off those burdens. So for example, in the first one, you would kind of see what you're giving up on proposition in exchange for what. Yeah?
Privacy.
Yeah.
For example.
Yeah.
Versus security.
Yeah, I think that's the main clash, right? I think that's quite intuitive. You're going to place more cameras, people have less privacy. In this debate, you're going to assume that your opponents are very likely to prove that privacy is going to be harmed. It's very easy. But you need to explain why security is then better. And it's very handy to do that in the beginning of your prep time so that you're directly clear about what the debate will be and you can more easily confer with your partner. On the second one, who would give, okay, there's a way off, a clash that is just one word and that happens on both sides, which you kind of give up on both sides. You don't need to explain it in one word. But... Lisa?
Fairness in some sense.
Yeah. So, in what sense?
Like on the proposition side, you give up the fairness that like the parents save all their lives and then the money's going to go to you. On the opposition side, you give the fairness that some people just don't have rich parents and they're going to be poor and their children are going to be poor and then.
Yeah, the other way around then, right? Proposition defends the rights of people who don't get that much money, and opposition simply says you earned that money. I think you can make a case for it. Notice again, the debate is quite leftist and progressive, so maybe not the strongest case. So kind of the interactive stuff starts here. So stakeholders, just very quickly as a recap, what kind of people, bodies, organizations, but also concepts are involved, right? A lot of people forget that concepts can also be a thing. Just so you can say, for example, the government is involved, right? The government has some sort of benefit or harm. Maybe the poor people are harmed or have some sort of benefit, stuff like that. But also just a concept such as equality or welfare can also be affected, and that is also a legitimate stakeholder. Just to recap, but the thing that you want to look at, and this is also something that I talked about in a workshop in the beginning in the first semester, which is the MICE model. I think there's like a large part of the people that actually didn't hear about that. MICE stands for money, ideology, coercion, and ego. It's quite intuitive, but the reason behind this is for you to explain why certain stakeholders take certain actions, right? And at the moment that you think, like, okay, maybe I don't know, Tom has something to do with this motion. Okay, why would Tom do this? Maybe because of his ideology, right? You think it's very important for poor people to be more welfaring, for example. So he would take an action for that. Maybe I'm a stakeholder in motion. I think, what does Mike care about? And maybe I'm just a selfish jerk, and I only care about money. And for some reason, I gain a lot of money if this motion is passed. But also, just why do stakeholders take certain actions, not because they are important, but because they have certain effects? And there's an example here. Is that clear, by the way? Yep. Anyone not?
Can you explain what coercion means?
Oh, right. So, sure. But I actually wanted to go through it. So, ideology, by the way, firstly that. If I would think of ideology, the first thing that would pop in my mind would be, yes,
Fascism.
no,
Democracy.
no. Okay, I would think of religion as an ideology for you to take actions. But also note that there are also, I don't want to say positive things because that kind of implies that religion is negative, which it is not. But also, for example, feminism would be an ideology for you to follow, a reason for you to take actions. Coercion is just the simple sense of the word. For example, Dirk is in the board, and Dirk would say, Mike, if you don't do this, I will kick you out of the society, for example, if he would be able to do that, right? So he's kind of coercing me. You could have blackmailing in there, but also look at not people coercing people, but also concepts coercing people. For example, everyone's favorite word, the patriarchy, coercing certain people into not having certain opportunities, right? Because women have less opportunities, yada, yada, yada. So they are kind of coerced to not try to go for higher up jobs and stuff like that. Is that a question?
Yeah, is coercion not just a sub-part of power, and is coercion another means to an end, namely power?
Okay, I guess you can explain that, but then it doesn't make a nice acronym.
Yeah, I know it might, and I know that it sucks, but it's what it means basically.
Yeah, I guess you can. I guess you can say that because in order to coerce someone, you need power, but that's mostly people on people. So the patriarchy isn't powerful, but it's like rigid or something like that because it's a concept. Power also kind of relates to ego, which is just if I look better because of some certain action, I will take that action. Maybe there are reasons why governments will, for example, why right-wing governments will not enforce progressive policies because it will make them look bad, not look at the people that chose them, the people that voted for them, harms their ego, makes them less believable, stuff like that. Also happens with people in higher positions in companies, stuff like that. By the way, just again, you're going to notice this. I say stuff like that quite often. Please just don't get annoyed by that. I'm working on it.
I'm not getting annoyed by it.
I know, but it's better than people saying like or right at the end of every sentence.
Stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do an example, and we're going to make this quite interactive. And I'll give you like 30 seconds to think of stakeholders. But firstly, info slide. The 8th Amendment is an amendment to the Irish Constitution that prohibits abortion based on the conception that the life of a fetus is considered equal to the life of a woman. A referendum on removing this amendment is slated to be held in May or June of 2018. Second part, respectability politics refers to a political strategy where movements seek to stress politeness, respect for the opponent, and positivity in their campaigns. Please let the message come out. Is this kind of clear to everyone?
Did you once debate this, man?
No. Yeah, I did once debate it. Yeah. Is this clear to everyone? Yeah? Yeah? Definitely like raise your hand if you don't get it, because then you're less able to participate. Okay. So the motion is this House believes that the repeal of the 8th movement should reject respectability politics, right? So they should do the respectability politics. The point of this exercise is not to think of arguments, but only what kind of people, concepts, bodies, organizations would be involved. What are their actions? What would their actions be as a result of this motion, and why would they do that? Note that mice model is not the only model that you can use, right? There are other reasons why people take certain actions, but it's just a very easy way to think of like behavior. Yep.
And only write down statements.
Yeah, so just stakeholders, what did they do and why did they do it? And just think of one. Well, you can think of multiple, of course, but I'm going to try to go around and see who can answer this stuff. And I'm just going to point at people and say that you have to say stuff, because I want everyone to speak. I don't know some of you guys' teachers though, so that's going to be interesting. Yeah, I know. So let's start in this column, and let's skip there. What was your name again? Mobin. Okay. What kind of stakeholder would you think would be involved?
I'm guessing the women in Ireland.
Yeah. Okay. And what would they do?
I mean, I don't know the exact political situation of where they stand, but I'm assuming most of them would want this amendment repealed because it gives them the right over their bodies. It's supposed to free, but with this amendment in place, it doesn't. So they want it repealed.
Okay. Daniel, would you think of a different stakeholder?
Not really, actually. I can try to think of something, but I can't come up with.
Okay. One tip would be look at the motion and just look at the words in the motion, and then maybe take the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth words. So I think, for example,
Yeah.
the repeal the eighth movement would be a stakeholder.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's just a general tip. Often there's at least one stakeholder in the motion. What would you think that they would want, and why would they want it, and what would they do?
Well, I don't quite understand the motion because it says to repeal the eighth movement. That is a movement that wants to
Repeal the Eighth Amendment, yes.
And then the question is, how would they?
Yeah, so what would they do, how would they be affected, and why would they take certain actions?
I think it's very difficult. I don't quite understand.
Okay, so let's try to go on, and then we'll try to wrap up this subject, and we'll be a little bit more nuanced in the explanation. Back there, what are your names? For you? What's your name? Yes?
Caroline.
Okay. How would you say, what do you think the Repeal the Eighth movement would want or do, and why?
Well, I wasn't thinking about that. I had another stakeholder.
That's fine too.
Which is a Catholic church
Okay.
that is always involved in abortion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Catholic church is involved in everything.
Okay.
No offense, sorry.
No.
So I was just thinking that it's not only going to involve women, which is like the main group we're talking about, but their main, I don't know, like the argument is that life is life since the day it is generated, and it doesn't matter if it's a zygote or whatever, it's already life.
Mm-hmm.
So it will be affected. Well, I don't really know if the Irish Constitution will take into account the church. I don't know because I don't really know much about.
Yeah, okay,
Right.
fair. But that's not in I don't think that's important right now in this
Okay.
in this
But-
discussion. So yeah, Catholic Church, and then you would probably say they act on their ideology, right?
Yeah,
Big
maybe
big
during the
Catholicism.
debate they are going to make a lot of pressure in order not to remove the amendment.
Yeah. So their action would be pressure based on ideology, for example. Yep. What's your name again? Okay. What would you? Okay, maybe you can fill in what Daniel started about the repeal the eighth. What kind of things would they want or do? No? Anyone else?
But I just
Yeah.
don't understand what the
So the repeal the eighth movement, I thought it was in the info slide. The repeal the eighth movement is a movement that wants to repeal the Eighth Amendment, so wants it gone. And they were kind of putting that political pressure behind it, which made the referendum happen, right? So what they would want would probably be the Eighth Amendment repealed, for sure.
What's the question specifically?
So what I just asked, why would they do that? What would they do?
So I think the core concept is basically these are propositions. So we want the freedom and freedom of choice associated with the body. So probably what you want to do is explain how this policy limits that, how respectability politics are more likely to achieve that goal. So like the goal of the eight. And then ultimately it enables people, like at least women, who might be Catholic or not, to make the decision themselves whether they engage in an abortion, yes or no. Like, it's a more abstract concept associated with God than explicit.
So just very quickly going through it, is it a little bit more clear, Daniel, about now? Okay, so that's good. So one more example that I would say is, or not examples, but as a general tip in all kinds of motions, is people tend to think in really big actors and big groups, and they kind of homogenize those groups, right? So they say governments and stuff like that. The thing is, this was a semi-final, and the point that we went through on was, instead of talking about governments, which our opening opposition did, we were closing opposition, is we talked about local governments, right? You want to break those up because it's very, I think, intuitive that local government has more influence on local policy, right? So if you think about women, try to subdivide them in groups, governments subdivide them in groups, economies subdivide them in groups. Don't make it too small, but this is kind of getting used to. Again, I've said this in every single workshop in the first semester. Practice makes perfect. Debating is a sport, so you need to practice to be more perfect.
I have a question.
Yes.
How you make like a subgroup of women in this case?
So you could say that there might be women who want an abortion, there are pro-life women, there are pro-choice women, there might be, in other motions, you might have people, women of ethnic minorities, sexual minorities, stuff like that. So there are a lot of different ways in which it gets up to 5 people. It's actually one of the final things in the concepts part. Just have something to ask, Victor, or no? Okay, cool. So let's just go on until the next thing. This is just a general intro to stakeholder analysis. So first concept would be equality, and this is your general stuff that people frame as the minority extension, which is just if you can't think of something, there's quite often in a motion that a certain minority group in society is benefited. That can be, for example, poor people. That can be ethnic minorities. That can be sexual minorities. That can be women. All those kinds of things, right? There are many minorities in society, and if you can explain how they are affected, you'll largely find a very huge impact because one, the debate lab is progressive, so we care about minorities, but also a very easy mechanism that you can make on minorities is that because they are by definition a minority, they don't have any say in a political process, or at least less of a say, therefore less power. We should protect them against that. Tyranny of the majority. I think that's a term. Not sure. Stuff like that, right? So just in general, we don't like the majority, we like minorities. And if you can't think of anything, then these are definitely ways to go. Yeah, but you need to be able to explain why they are so important, right? Why do we actually care about them? Yep.
We like minorities, but why does the government like minorities?
As in, so what I want to say is I don't want to delve too deep in it because it's not about developing arguments that much. Just in general, the basic argument is a government cares about its people. First job is protecting people, and you can explain that you have more of a duty to protect people who cannot protect themselves because they don't have any say in the political process and stuff like that. Again, and stuff like that. Yep. Okay, first example, I'm going to do one example per thing so we can kind of quickly go through and make this more interactive. So let me just see what the second example is here. Yeah, okay, let's just do this one. So this has believes that criminal justice legislation should be entirely determined by a panel of technocrats, and the technocrats are people who have studied criminal justice for a long time, have been experts in the field, stuff like that. They've been working as judges, attorneys, barristers. I don't know what the difference is between attorneys and barristers, but I know those are two different words. And then try to think of what would be your minority extension, like what kind of minority groups would be affected, in what way could we gain more equality? Because I think that could be an argument on both sides. So try to think about that for a little bit, and then maybe just look at intuitive groups. Yes.
Recurring question. When do you think the motion's going to end? Because few people ask when the second half is.
Oh, there's no second half.
There will be no second half. Okay.
Maybe if we hurry up, but probably not. But if people are coming late, they can just come in whenever. That's like it's a non-cohesive workshop, so you can kind of step in whenever you want.
Yeah, but it's yours.
Okay, well, you guys can also step in whenever you want. So who can? Who's got some ideas? Maybe we stay back there. Maybe what's your name?
Ariel.
What's Ariel?
Ariel.
Yes. Okay. So can you think of anything?
Okay. Technocrats, what as you said, are from highly educated people, highly educated people, including people who have the money to educate themselves. So in that matter, they might not consider poor people, or understand completely the problem with it.
Okay, yeah. think that could be usually fucked up for you guys.
I think that could be a valid point. Anyone else?
To be said right now, like criminal justice legislation is determined by parliament, who are they're basically majority, so minorities are intrinsically sort of possible of being harmed, which can be negated by the fact that the separate panel of technocrats who are not really influenced by majority politics.
Yeah, definitely. Because like the government is selected by a majority because they're representatives. That means that they represent a majority. So the majority kind of has like the final say in it. You can say that technocrats can focus more on making it more fair. If you look at the situation maybe in the US, you can look at ethnic profiling, stuff like that. That maybe technocrats are better able to look at that. But then again, I think also Ariel's point on opposition then also stands. Like maybe they are, because they are technocrats and they're high experts, they're often quite old, they still come from a semi-rigid system, maybe they still hold the same values, and all those kinds of things. I found an alternative to and stuff like that. So, yep. Style, okay. Just also sexual minorities is very, I would say very difficult because I personally know not that much about trans people and stuff like that. But if you know about how their group works, right, how the LGBTQ plus community kind of works with trans people, that could be a thing. Maybe you want to look into that if you think that's interesting. But those are just certain groups that might be getting better off and more equal. Yep. Cool. That very quickly. So maybe towards more experienced debaters, if you have a policy motion, so this house would do something, and you're opposition and you know nothing what to do, what do you learn? So if it's a policy motion, so this house would just in general, if there you would have a policy motion, this house would do something, and you're opposition.
Policy is doesn't like the opposite thing.
Just undercut their whatever their reasoning is for supporting it.
Counterport. Okay, so it's an 8-letter word. It starts with a B and it ends with backlash.
Backlash.
Yeah, okay, let's talk about backlash.
Don't give people that advice.
No. So just I think this is important because I think backlash is a very intuitive point to make. Just in general, backlash, an adverse reaction to something which has gained popularity, prominence, or influence. A lot of people say, oh, but then people become angry, right? Maybe people become angry because it's less focused on them. And a lot of people stop there. The thing is, I'm not sure why people becoming angry is such a bad thing. So just the tip right there is to always explain and manifest that anger into something. For example, protests, maybe those people have power and you will have loss of political capital, stuff like that. Maybe you will have less power to buy churches at Plato. So thank you for your attention. And all those kinds of things, right? So just the general tip is manifest backlash into stuff that people do. For example, backlash is actually quite a strong argument if you can make it in discrimination cases. So for example, gender discrimination, religious discrimination, racial discrimination, and stuff like that. Again. Okay, so the first example is a general example, and I think it's more about the idea of the motion, which is this house believes that feminists, this is not the one that is here, but okay. Feminists should oppose dating sites which seek to romantically link rich men and physically attractive women. So there was this case where men had to pay an extraordinary amount, and they could just kind of choose which attractive woman to, I don't know, it was kind of like neo-slavery. So the thing is with backlash, like what kind of backlash argument would you see in this case? Angry white people. Jack, what would you think?
Yeah, I suppose see backlash probably against the women, just because like they're using men for money.
Are they?
By the way, shout out that you call out the rich guy.
I don't even know that the guy is rich.
I am rich.
Well, he has
We
money
would
to
say-
buy a jacket. Well, David, what would you think then?
What do you call it? The physically attractive woman here? That's not.
No, but so which backlash? I think if as opposition could say, what do you want? Which
Yeah.
side do you want?
Backlash is usually an opposition argument, so yeah.
So you can say people don't have a right to do whatever they want anymore. People don't have a right to do like if these rich men. I don't know the info slide. I think the info slide is given, but like say people cannot do what they want to do. Say if they're not linked to what they want to do, they'll become angry. If they'll become angry, they'll try to retract from the dating sites because this dating site doesn't give them what they want anymore. Maybe they get to other sites, and when you get away from these sites, there's less possibility for these people who want to find these men.
Okay, I think the reasoning that David gives is quite generalizable. Namely, the main argument of opposition in this house believes that feminists should do X is feminists only focus on petty issues. What change do they actually get? The effect is not that these men necessarily retract from the dating sites, but in general, that they kind of lose their trust in the feminist movement. They're less willing to kind of back the movement. And then you kind of explain how political movements need support. And that is a sort of backlash because that means that you can get less change for the equality points for example, women. Or maybe even if you want to look at intersectional feminism for certain women of color. All kinds of interesting stuff there.
Well, I don't know
Yes.
if this works, but taking into account the word should.
Yeah.
Maybe we can focus on feminist group. They won't be like, okay, people say they should do something because feminism is about that, not telling women what to do or what not to do. Feminists can also join like updatings and all of that. That's not like an argument of feminism, but the real argument is not telling me what to do because I'm a woman. So maybe that could be, I don't know if that's a backlash, but it could be an argument.
Yeah, I think two things. So firstly, this motion does not force the feminists to do something. This motion kind of says it would be good if feminists would oppose those things. But I think that the argument there is valid because you just look at this motion on proposition can assume that feminism is sort of homogenous, whereas it's not, right? Because you kind of say you have different branches of feminism. Maybe some of them don't want to. You have I forgot the term, but also the feminists that are really pro-pornography, for example, and you have people that are anti-pornography. Maybe there also are on various different kind of aspects in this motion. So that's just also a thing about differentiating between subgroups within a larger group. Yeah, is backlash kind of clear? So always manifest into stuff. People becoming angry is not an impact in a debate.
I want to ask something about
Yes.
Yeah, so basically, for example, I was reading up in Vancouver, there are these sugar daddy websites, and what they do is like they link rich men and young women, and the rich men pay for the young women's college tuition, and they're both they're seeking for this kind of like setup, basically. So if I refer to that, and then women would there would be a backlash for losing out on that, that economic financial support, sort of. Is that kind of making the is that a bad move because it takes away and it brings the debate to a much smaller portion?
It doesn't necessarily limit the debate to a smaller option because I also think that the concept running behind your argument is simply choice feminism, which just says you can do whatever you want, but then link it to you actually opted into this, you chose for this, so you kind of should have the abilities, right? So I think that's fair. As long as in opening argument you don't say like this only applies to women from Poland and men from Britain who then pay this amount of money or stuff like that, right? So I think that's a fair argument, but just don't base it on only examples. So no, I think that's definitely a valid opposition argument. Good. Okay. Next one, politics. I thought I took out this slide, but just very general. Political backlash is also a thing that's kind of manifesting backlash into the loss of political capital, meaning less ability to have change. Okay, so let me just focus on the next thing. So this is one of the larger points. In Dutch, you have something called standaard geschilpunten. There's not really a proper translation. I would just say standard points of clash, which are effectivity, feasibility, legitimacy, and proportionality. So maybe a certain policy is not effective, maybe it's not feasible, it costs too much money, or there's no support, or it's not legitimate, right? What does that mean? That means that it might not be morally allowed for the actor to undertake a certain action, right? So I think it's best explained by an example. So info slide. America First is broadly a foreign and international economic policy doctrine that prioritizes the material interest of the US over all others. And the motion is then, this House believes that it is legitimate for the President of the United States to put America first. So there might be several reasons why something might be illegitimate. Mostly, I think it is on a moral kind of plane, also because the practical ideas about that are linked towards the moral stuff. So, for example, let's say that in this current situation or proposition, you could say this is the doctrine that Donald Trump proposed. We see that the people of America in majority support this doctrine. As a government, as the president of the US, you need to listen to the majority, therefore it's legitimate for you to do so. Right? Seems fair?
So you talk about moral legitimacy. What about law legitimacy? When like America signed this contract, it said they should do X when Y happens.
Yeah, I think that could also be a thing, but that kind of based on morals, right? Because like morals underlie the law. Law is based upon morals, right? You should not kill. That's a moral. Yeah. So stuff like that. Yeah. So what other ways would you think of why it would be? I would say probably illegitimate, because I think illegitimacy is usually a larger point in debates rather than legitimacy, because it's more easy to see what the harm is because you actually go against moral principles. On the other hand, you could also say if you don't follow up on something that you should do, for example, the majority, that's also illegitimate to do. But what would you guys think would be reasons why it's illegitimate for a government to, for the president to put America first? Tom, maybe?
Well, I think it's a rather specific argument, but you could argue that especially in the case of the United States, it's like usually the president, for example, is not sometimes elected by a majority, but by a minority. So that, like for example, the candidate loses gets more votes than the actual president because of the goofy election system. So you could say, like, especially right now with the current American president, who got less votes than the competitors. So therefore, you could say he actually does not represent the majority, and therefore does not have the legitimacy to implement that doctrine.
Yeah, in this example, that wouldn't be the case.
But like in a broader sense,
but then I think at the moment that you would look at, like, Obama won both by a majority vote.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and
so
at that point, the argument is not valid anymore.
Yeah, Linda, you raised your hand, right?
Yeah, one point of consequentialism that you could argue that doing this, if a government would put America first, would lead to such negative consequences that it would be immoral to do this.
Yeah. Like what? Yeah. Okay, tying on wars, you can think of a point relating to wars, why it's illegitimate. Because I think that's probably the argument on opposition. I'm not sure I won with it, so that's maybe on a little bit biased. But Victor?
You could perhaps say, right, so America first entails like every American people, but that also means, for example, pulling out of Iraq, which would lead to like further destabilization of the Middle East, stuff like that.
Okay, I think there's a step in between. Yeah. No. Oh, I thought you were okay. Tom?
Well, the moment America First gets put into action, they basically, as the United government, they prioritize like the interests of America over interest of every other country's interest, and like you could say that today's society is about cooperation and working together, which would basically like go against like the complete system that was built up within the last 50 years.
Yeah. Adam?
I don't know, maybe I misunderstood the concept of legitimacy. maybe legitimacy is hard. I mean, like it's easier, right? To help you, like it's illegitimate.
Yeah, it's a difficult concept.
Yeah, but yeah, unfortunately, to me, legitimacy is not really based on the concept of not person.
Yeah.
So, it is you cannot do everywhere around it. You know that you consequences of action.
Yeah.
When it comes to legitimacy, it's a little bit.
Yeah, there are many different ways. So let's just get Derek and Joshua, and then we'll kind of move on.
Yeah, so if I think about the concept of war and how you run with this, would be that because America has the capability to conquer, there's the capability to go in countries and steal economic things like, I don't know, materials, oil, lithium iron in Africa, or something like that, right? So like, if you look at it very literally, that would be my guess, that when it comes to war, that is illegitimate to do. Yeah?
Yeah.
But that's a quite different issue because, like for him, the literally saying for the victim, he said, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Actually, what he's going to do is just contain punishment and stuff, but when it comes to war and stuff, so the war, people didn't vote for the war. But I'm description his action after the victim would be somehow contradictory with the state, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Joshua, what would you?
Yeah, so for me, legitimacy sort of resembles the concept of power, and then what you need to understand is what constitutes that particular form of power. So, like in this sense, I'd say the president itself has a sort of legitimacy surrounding it, constituting a decision, whatever. But ultimately, what Alex says, I feel is very true that the extent of legitimacy of a president is constituted by people that vote him into office in the first place. So key here is then understanding how this policy would relate to the principles that its followers, so again, the use of that concept, really constitute constitute this legitimacy, and then working from the actors that constitute the legitimacy of the president to work towards the implications.
I guess you could do that. So I haven't heard the point yet. So what we ran was simply America has a colonial past. America starts wars. America has a responsibility to protect the shitholes that they created. If they made it a wasteland, they have to make it peace, to quote a meme. So at the moment that they start wars in Afghanistan, kind of, just on the principle already, we think that they should take care of it, right? If you make it a mess, you have to clean it up. So that would be a point of legitimacy as well. So sometimes it's also fine to not go too deep into the consequences and stay a little bit more principled and vague, especially because those arguments are becoming more popular in the big land. So let me just see what the next thing is. Yeah, so I thought I skipped this, so we're going to skip this. Judy, let's first have a 10-minute break.
Why not?
What?
We can do this as well. If people want to
What?
debate, we can also not like. I don't want to take anyone's eating or coffee break away, but if people want to debate afterwards, it might be better to not take breaks. Or
Yeah,
just a
okay.
really short
Okay, so
one.
let's just, if you have a strong preference, just shout.
Uh-oh.
Do you guys want to keep going and do a debate afterwards if there's time, or do you guys just want to take a break and there will be chance for no debate?
You think the workshop still going to last an hour? Then
I think it will probably last half an hour till 45 minutes.
Alright, what's your plan? It's also for the rest of
it's like I sort of
You came to debate. Okay.
It's not the argument.
Okay, who wants to debate? Raise your hand. Okay, we're going to continue.
Okay, that's fine. But the thing is that the next couple of concepts are going to be the largest ones. Do you need to go, Carlina? Or? Oh, okay. I thought you were packing up for that.
The next few concepts are a little bit more vague, but if you understand them, they can be quite powerful. And I think it would be best to just kind of see in all of the motions that you're going to have, like the next couple of 5 maybe, try to see if you can apply these and like practice them. So firstly, duty. Who does not know what duty is? What? Yeah. So that would be that one has to do something, often from a moral perspective, and then the right to self-prioritize is trumped, right? Because you have to do something, you cannot think of yourself, but you have to think of other people, concepts, bodies, organizations, other stakeholders. So some things under this, there are several ways or reasons why people do that. Firstly, reciprocity. Reciprocity is just like if I don't know, if Tom lends me some money, it's lend, right? And then, yeah. So if Tom lends me some money to get coffee in the coffee break, I kind of owe him, and he probably expects me to next week then pay a coffee for him, for example, stuff like that. It can also be larger than that. So just larger loans, for example. Maybe you, if you also just look at the mafia, there's reciprocity is also a thing, right? I killed one of the guys that harmed you. You're going to hunt down one of the guys that harms me. There's just a feeling of familial bond, stuff like that, and there's this huge feeling of reciprocity. You kind of owe someone something, and then that is a moral way, a moral reason for you to take certain actions. Reciprocity clear. Second one is misbalance. That can be 2 ways, either actively or passively. So I think firstly passively, there is some misbalance in the world. For example, the glass ceiling exists, the patriarchy exists, there's a misbalance between the opportunities of men and women. Therefore, for example, men have a duty to turn down a job offer at the moment that a woman could get it, right? Very extreme example. But you could also use the same thing in gender quotas in boards, for example. Maybe you give them more opportunities, and it's legitimate to give them those opportunities versus men of equal capabilities simply because people are a woman, right? But also just actively, and that kind of goes back on the legitimacy kind of point. If you made a mess of something, if you caused misbalance, then you also need to pay for that. A very common example is the colonialism kind of debate, right? You caused harm, and should we pay reparations or not towards those countries? I think there are valid points on either side. Probably to pay reparations is a little bit stronger. But what kind of ideas would you say means of duty on proposition and opposition? Like, why would you have a duty or actually not have a duty to pay reparations towards, I don't know, why would you do that towards, I don't know, Indonesia or something? I think we call it as in, I dropped history as soon as possible. So.
Maybe like reverse reciprocity. It's in like if you cause harm, you need to absorb it.
Yeah, that would be misbalance, right? Reciprocity is kind of positive.
Yeah, I guess so. So it's a different one. Yeah,
yeah, indeed, like you did harm, you have to solve that harm, so that's a thing. But also, what would you say in opposition? Why do you have a duty not to pay reparations?
Well, most of the time, especially in colonialism, the former colony still has like very strong economic and political relationship with the former colonial power. So you could, on the one hand, argue, well, there was some sort of reparations already paid through that very close cooperation. Also, and colonialism ended 50, 60, 70 years ago. It's a long, long time ago. The country had like a lot of time to develop itself. Like made it not legitimate to ask for peace now.
Yeah, I see Joshua shaking no, but I think that's a valid point. So, yeah, okay, fair. But I think the argument is you can. Oh, you want to say something, Jack?
Oh, just yeah, I don't know if you could bring different actors into it, like essentially whether the German government is still right to pay for what the Nazi government did, or whether today's governments are still responsible for governments which didn't have to do it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the same idea. Little bit in lesser or in a different kind of way, but definitely a thing. I think on proposition you can argue that the state is continuous. That's a thing, right? At the moment that the Dutch state does something now, then the government in 20 years' time still holds responsibilities for that because it's not the people that do it, but the country of the Netherlands and your representatives or the people wanted that. I think also in opposition you can argue the direct opposite, say that it's just the government, it's the people that are doing it, it's Donald Trump making the dumb decisions right now. The next term, I don't know, Kanye shouldn't have to hold responsibilities for that. So, yeah. No, Kanye, for life. Is that kind of clear? I heard something now. Cool. Last thing, and this is just because sometimes it is not obvious what the idea of reciprocity or misbalance means in emotion. I'm not sure what an example is, but this is something that another person who almost won the European Championships told us, which is called moral luck, which is just simply people often refer to it as the birth lottery. For example, you were born in a wealthy country. You were born as a man compared to a woman. You were born as a Caucasian versus someone of color. Therefore, because certain structures exist that limit other people, you were lucky, and therefore you owe to people who were less lucky. So it seems somewhat intuitive. Like it's very difficult to explain that to the judges why that is the reason, because luck is not something you can do much about, right? Okay. There's an example, which is the second one. It's one of the longest motions ever. This House believes that majority ethnic straight males have a duty to not accept a job offer if that means that a member of a minority group would get the job. So, how would you see these concepts applied to that motion? Let's get people looking into it. Anna?
Well, I think that in other words, we obviously say that well, the white male has a duty because he has been privileged, because there's a misbalance that he could make up with it, or he could make up for the general misbalance that there are way more white male people that have jobs, that have good jobs, and there are any women, people of color, homosexual people, all that. But honestly, I feel like this is just like you could also very easily argue against that, just by saying that just because he's of a majority ethnicity, or he's straight, or he's male, doesn't really mean that he owes anyone anything. For example, he doesn't have to pay back anyone.
Yeah, it's kind of also the luck kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Even though that maybe the person from the minority group would have would be unlucky to be born in such a group, they also had no choice in whether they were kind of born into that group. However, I think that proposition is probably stronger by saying tough luck. This makes sure for structural change in the long run if a lot of people kind of do it. But in opposition, you can also run that for one person, maybe the effect is not that strong.
I would run on that opposition, because in that case I would create an even more misbalance, because like the people who already have the job, and then there comes this minority in, and he gets like judged even more, because like they then view him, oh, he did not get the job because of his qualifications, because she's a female, because he's a homosexual. He got the job because he's a minority, so he's like from a knowledge standpoint, like he's inferior to us. He's just there because of this policy, and not because like he actually can do something.
Yeah, here's a fun term for you. We call those people token minorities. So it's a fun term to use. Did you have a question, or were you stretching?
No, I didn't have a question, but I was waiting to ask it. Are we done with this example?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I think so. Anyone want to go on? Just want to get quickly through this, and it's probably best to just try everything out, see how it works. I know Lisa and I did. We ran an entire tournament only running the next concept, which is autonomy.
It's not entirely true. Most
of I think we ran it everything. It doesn't matter. Anyway.
So what I'm sometimes struggling with is like duties that are given by a certain ideology. Say you have a duty to serve your country. You have a duty as a woman, and then like feminists give you some kind of duty. I don't see them that being represented by
So in means of the first one, nationalism, I think that could be a case of reciprocity. That's just the standard social contract argument, which is the state gives you rights. In order for you to retain those rights, you have to do something for the state. Those are your duties, so they kind of counterbalance one another. It means of you being a woman in the feminist movement put stuff on you. I don't believe that. there are plenty of women, not plenty, there are women who don't identify as feminists per se, but also say that the feminist movement does not benefit their the things that they want. But you could kind of say that there's also of misbalance then for you wanting to stand up for the general good of your identity group, I would say. Stuff like that. I say, see a hand there?
Yeah, I was.
No. Okay, so let's just quickly go on so we can try to have a debate. Again, try these. If you're really excited about them, just try them at home. Or we have a new training and development committee which you can apply to. See your email. So, next one, as I flagged, autonomy. Just in general, the ability to govern yourself. So at the moment that the government is really coercive and simply forcing you to do certain things, i.e. dictatorships and stuff, you're not free to do what you want. Your autonomy is hard, right? You can't do everything that you want. This also extends to, for example, bodily autonomy. We had a really crappy motion at the Amsterdam tournament, but again, you could run autonomy in there, which was something along the lines of, regardless of the choice of the person in question, this house would allow family members to block organ donation. And we were proposition, so that was kind of bad. But on opposition, you could quite easily argue a bodily autonomy, namely you made that choice in your own life. You had that autonomy to make that choice. Who are we to take away that autonomy, right? Because you, I think that seems quite intuitive. You made that choice and suddenly you're saying, no, fuck you, we don't really care about you now that you're dead, right? That could be a thing. Yeah. Okay, so I think one thing to notice on that and something to read up on, which I'm not going to talk about right now, is the concept of free will and determinism. If you haven't heard of that, kind of read up on that. It kind of says that all events are predetermined, we have no influence over our actions, stuff like that. There was a debate in the finals at Roosevelt in Middleburg, which was this house as an all-loving, all-knowing God of only one, that would represent all religions, would appear to humanity every so many years and reveal themselves and stuff. And on opposition, you can run that because that creature is, or entity is perceived as all-knowing and all-powerful. People think that they can't do anything without that God seeing it, so they will pay attention, so they won't do what they actually want. So it's really abstract. Think about that. If you're bored sometime, it's cool. I don't know. It didn't quite work out for us in the finals, but it's fine. Okay. So firstly, an example on conscription. You could say why conscription is bad or good with regards to autonomy. I think there's cases on both sides here. Sis, maybe? You haven't spoken much yet.
No, I don't have an opinion, so.
You don't have an opinion. Okay.
She doesn't have to.
Linda?
It actually depends on because if there's a situation with serious danger of war or Russia invading or state, you could argue that if Russia would manage this invasion, it would have even less autonomy than if they would have limited restrictions for
Yeah, I think that's fair. One thing to notice in between, which I kind of wanted to notice on the rights slides, which we didn't cover. Also, the same guy that gave the second tip in the beginning about watching online debates, the best speaker in Europe, he gave quite a convincing reason why the right to life and defending life is the best right, because it supersedes all rights, right? If you're dead, you don't have any other rights, which means the right to life is the primary right to kind of protect. And I think that kind of ties in with Linda's argument about if you're controlled by Russia or you're dead, you have less autonomy and less control over your life. Because either you don't have a life, or Russia just says, fuck you, you're off now. It's a little bit more nuanced than that, of course, right? You need to explain that because you go through with that. So Tom, or one of you was What about just on proposition? No, on opposition. What would you say? What kind of autonomy argument could you make? Anna?
Well, if it's mandatory, then you can't set yourself. Which means that, they take away your own right to decide on something.
Yeah. So it's just in general conscription is bad because they're just saying, haha, you're owned by the state. which is just simply not true because you do have the autonomy. Is that concept clear, kind of clear to everyone? It's also really vague, so again, practicing why that is important and explaining that is very much a thing. We'll skip that. Last concept is identity, and I think this is a really strong one, and probably the strongest one during the workshop. So identity is based on two questions. We're almost done. Firstly, how do I perceive myself, but also how do others perceive me? At the moment that I would have a certain identity, which others would shame me for or something like that, I would very likely not include that as one of the parts to my identity. So how you should kind of see this is, for example, if I would say, hi, I'm Mike, here are my identities. So I'm a man, I'm Dutch, I'm a debater, I'm an econometrician, I like video games, I like reading, I'm white, I'm straight, stuff like that. There's the intersection right there of all kinds of things, and then you need to kind of decide what are those things. And people are unique because there are infinitely many complex combinations of certain identities. So what do you need for that? Relatability. That seems quite obvious, right? In order for something for you to include that into your identity, i.e. something that you find very important and defining about yourself, you need to be able to find that important and to be relatable to that. I would not include me being a psychologist in my identity because I simply am not, and I cannot relate to myself as a psychologist. Stuff like that. Same thing as I would include myself being an econometrician because that's simply what I do. That's my job, student life, stuff like that. But secondly, and that's more important, you need to have a positive qualification for that. So you need to be able to think that that thing adds a positive idea, a positive concept towards your life. It constructs in a positive way towards there. But also, if you're making rankings and all those kinds of things, I would say that. Wait, I had an example here. So I would say I would include studying econometrics and debating over making YouTube videos because I simply don't have a positive qualification for the latter. Like I do it, but it's not the prime thing that I tell people that I do it. Also because people might judge me, or because it's simply not that I earn money with, or earn status with, or earn a job with. All those kinds of things that would like further my identity and my understanding of myself. So what you want to look at under identity, let's see if there's one last thing. Is does the motion impact identity either positively or negatively? And that largely relates to if it in the freedom in which you're able to exert that identity. So if this would not be me, I could, for example, include my religion. Maybe that's a thing, and maybe there are some motions that limit religion of some sort or exercising religion. And that is a bad thing because people have a huge positive qualification for identity, for religion in their identity, right? So at the moment that people rank that really highly and make that stripe bigger, or maybe they have multiple stripes covering the same subject, it's really abstract, but still, they care very deeply for it. They want to be as free as possible in that, so you don't want to harm that. Yep, and the same thing happens negatively. The last thing then, before one last example, now we'll skip the example because it's going to be quite extensive and we can try to apply that in the debate. So why is the positive qualification also strong enough to include something in your identity? That's also something you want to explain, right? At the moment that you think that emotion harms something that people might include in their identity, you need to be able to explain why people would include that in their identity and why it's so important. If a motion might harm religion, for example, and you don't explain why people care so much about religion that it would change their life drastically, I'm not sure why I should care, right? If this motion would impact closing Plato's doors, for example, and you don't explain why ISIS cares so much about Plato, I'm not sure why I should care about not closing Plato's doors. Yeah? So all those kinds of things, because I think ISIS would probably include being a Platon in her identity. I'm not sure. I'm not ISIS, so I wouldn't know. Yeah. Is that concept to this extent somewhat clear? Yeah, again, like you don't need to bring every single concept in the debate, of course. You want to choose one or two and then expand on those a lot to make a really positive contribution towards the debate because they're very difficult to sometimes elaborate on. Cool. Okay, very quickly again, real life examples, read about current affairs. Use audiobooks. Again, just put them in the background while you're studying. Studying might not be a good example, but when you're doing anything, sometimes the knowledge just sticks. Quickly, an example that we're not going to talk about, but just in general, you're at the European Championships. I was me. I have no knowledge whatsoever, especially about current affairs back then. And I had no idea what was happening over there. If you're not sure what's happening over there, you can think of Latin America as a country where there's a lot of conflict, where there are cartels running around, where there's food crises and stuff like that. And apparently that was also the case in Venezuela. So we were kind of lucky there. So if you don't know, try to generalize it towards comparable situations. But if you do know stuff, just go in depth. So in conclusion, if you're prepping and need to think of arguments, use the case model. Think of concepts, like the bulk of the workshop that we talked about. Think of actors, so the stakeholders that you're going around. Think of scenarios, so in what ways might these concepts happen, or might these actors take certain actions, what does that world look like? And if you can sketch that, if you can frame that debate into your advantage, then that's better because you're more easily believable. And lastly, examples are always good, right? Just real life examples. Why would people be impacted? For example, I think what Jack brought about the Germany versus what Nazi Germany did. That's a real life example that might give you some context for your arguments. Yeah. Any general questions? You can always send me a message later or ask anyone else. So let's just, do we want to have like a 5-minute break so we can get ready for the debate? And then I can.
It's like a 10-minute break.
Have you asked the YouTube watchers to like and subscribe to this channel?
Oh yeah, if you guys did enjoy this video, you're welcome to leave a like rating, comment down below what you guys did think, and subscribe button is there. Okay, so like that. Thank you for watching.
Is everybody staying for the debate? And does anyone know if there's more people coming for the debate?
Yeah, I know Jos is coming, maybe Maat is coming.
Yeah, but it wasn't a WhatsApp chat, it was 140, I believe you said, right?
Yeah.
Oh, then we have a 15-minute break now. 15? Yeah, because of
The clock up there is not correct.
some people are.
The others are staying?
Okay.
Ah, sad. Disappointed. You can leave as well. Do you have to
We will see if it's possible.
Yeah.
If you have an extra screen. Yeah.
Maybe have like. How was that? Exhausting? It's amazing fun for the debaters. It was very difficult to be like the first motion, like 8 months, and also the well, actually, I felt like it was still like picture of like no, like really. I don't know about record makes when they do
I'll send you the invoice and get
You don't want to make it too difficult.
Perfect. So this guy's oh, yeah. Not yet. So, that was pretty tough, right?
It's alright. I mean, I've done debate before, but I used to do modeling animation.
Right.
So I've done that for about 7 to 8 years. And I was president of my university.
I found it already very
Also, British parliamentary, I've dabbled in it, but not extensively. So, I mean, I forgot the rules and how it works. That is a question.
This is all first person.
example, in London it's all
Yeah,
first
no,
person.
that's the thing.
So I say we on my front.
Yeah, but it's not important. Iemand te judgen?
Wherever the quote is.
Ja,
So
en echt gewoon
my
Lisa, ik weet niet, haar doen anders kunnen we maar 1 pp doen. Met 8 judges of zo. Ja. Oh, 7. 15 minuten.
So, overall,
Je wil een extension doen vandaag?
so they do roles, right? So this is the first one is so pretty much that
Die 6, wat wil jij doen?
Als het kan wil ik graag huis doen, maar nou is het
Ja, ik denk dat het kan. Ik ga
So, and then bring arguments, explain it from
Which is
them and
cool.
analyzing them. Very simple opponents, they can improvise, but same with this person.
Wieso, laat kijken.
Volgens mij, Victor moet ons volgens mij om 12 uur daar hebben. Dus wel een uur. Ja, ik weet niet zeker of dat klopt. Moet je even Victor navragen? Want ja, het lijkt me vrij goed. Zeker omdat al die supermarkten die staan.
12:30 komen. Maar ik heb tot 12:30 les.
Oh, dan maakt niet. Je kan altijd laten komen. Dan weten we dat ook.
We hebben nou een novice room en een serieus room.
Wat we nu gaan doen, weet ik niet.
Ik wou nog ooit eens een keer sharen als judge.
Nou, we hebben niet genoeg mensen om dat te horen.
Is dat jouw
But it's better because if you do, what they call tries to explain to judges that when this speaker extension speaker is broad, what's the best thinking about it. Because they compare, they reframe, they explain why they have won. Right, so it's on a broad opening, but they explain this, which is comparatively simple to discuss your life or say, just people are the same goes so, and the same goes for cost. That's DC, there's boosts, and competitions are all everybody here is this person
Hoe dan met zo'n weekend van de derde of de 10e?
Die gaan de afstand. Ik onthoud alles. Maar jullie kunnen niet doen.
Dirk jullie.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. It's fine. It's okay. It's all fine.
Hebben we zo weinig mensen?
Ja, we hebben tweede bezig.
Maar Jos komt nu ooit.
Komt wel.
Jos komt wel.
Ja, ik zal even bellen. Hij is
Wil je dat vandaag wel of niet?
Ja, dat wel.
Ja, dan komt hij niet meer.
Ja, ja.
Hey Jos, we zijn al redelijk, we zijn al redelijk laat.
No, you're going, you and Jasper, and Mike is coming.
Was like, I looked at one time, so it's also zijn. Yes. Hey, goeie work voor mij.
Het punt is dus van iedereen
Yes.
Especially
Ik ben nog live.
stream.
you had me down.